So what I wanted to do today, the presidential race looks quite close, even in the a couple of weeks before the election. We're about a little over 2 weeks out, and I would say this is quite a race, much like unlike in 2008, when I think a good look at the polls, you would be able to see that Obama was headed towards a reasonably safe victory. This race this year has all the trappings of the 2000 and 2004 campaigns that Bush ran, and certainly not like the 1996 campaign where Clinton comfortably won over his Republican challenger, Bob Dole. So what I wanted to first do was review, if I can slide through my notes here, is review just what we're looking for. And the chapter we read, chapter 2 of Abramson, Aldrich, and Rhodey, really went through the competition that Obama faced in gaining victory in 2008. Now, the point to make, I think, is what you would have learned in GV, the earlier American politics class, but it bears re-emphasizing that this race is really affected by America's sort of peculiar institutions, and that peculiar political institution is the Electoral College, right? Americans don't vote directly for president, okay? They vote for electors pledged to these candidates by state, okay? And the campaign would look very, very different if it was a simple majority or simple plurality vote determined the winner of the presidential election. Abramson and Aldrich and Rhodey make a very good point that in reality there are a lot of states where, if you look at the past 5 elections, did not change hands. Okay, the solid states, if you look at the solid states, the Republicans benefit. Okay, if you look at the number of states just entering that have not moved in the last 5 elections safely in the Republican column, okay, the Republicans have quite a lot of safe states that they really don't need to worry about. What are these states? States like Kansas, states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, right? You can almost think of, if we looked at a picture of the United States, okay, is sometimes people refer to it as an L, okay? The Republican L sort of starts at North Dakota and it kind of goes right down to Texas, right? And that's about 100 electoral votes. And then it shoots across the South but doesn't include Florida. So states like Louisiana, Mississippi, and Georgia are comfortably Republican, okay? The Democrats gain a bit if you look at states that have gone Democratic only 4 out of the 5 times. So states like California, states like New York, right? These are states which are comfortable Democratic territory, those are pretty solid. But there are also states like Wisconsin and Michigan, okay, where the Democrats are reasonably safe, and most of New England with the exception of New Hampshire, okay? So really presidential elections strategically come down to, when all is said and done, just a very few states. Okay, and in 2008, okay, the battleground states, okay, were generally identified by Abramson et al. As Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and Missouri. Okay, so I went on realclearpolitics.com and Polling Reporter, Mystery Pollster, which is the Huffington Post now, and looked at the polls. And what's good is they really compile all the political polling that's going on at the time. And what they do is sort of through a complex way, they weight polls based upon the distance, the number of days that the poll has been set. And they do sort of what's called a nonlinear smoothing process to get sort of a trend. And then they come up with confidence intervals. So you'll see, well, Romney is up by 2 points in this state, and this gives us, based upon the number of polls, the spread of the polls, and the distribution of all of the polls, and when they've been done, you know, a 60% or a 70% chance that Romney will carry the state, okay? Well, Obama is looking quite good in the 2008 battleground states, okay? All of the advertising is mostly suspended in Pennsylvania because Obama's up by 6 points, 50% Obama, 44% Romney. That's quite a spread for a candidate to recover from this late in the game. Ohio, much like last time, this time is very much a swing state. Okay, so Ohio is showing Obama in the lead by about 2 percentage points. And if you look at most polls, okay, a poll of 1,000 or 1,200 people will have a margin of error, okay, that's greater than that. Okay, and when we look at polls, okay, if we look at just a snapshot, one poll of, let's say, 1,200 people, and we see a margin of error of plus or minus, let's say, 3%. Well, what does that mean? That means if we were to do that poll under the same conditions, thousands and thousands and thousands of polls, okay, Obama would be in the lead in about 90, or there would be about, if there were thousands and thousands of polls, sorry, and Obama was scoring 48%, okay, 95% of the polls that were done, Obama would fall between plus or minus 3% of that 48%. Okay? So to write it on the board, okay, what a poll really is seen as is a point estimate of 48% around a distribution of hypothetical polls. Okay? So if we say a poll has a margin of error or a sampling error of plus or minus 3%, that means we wouldn't be surprised if we did a poll and got between 45, okay, and 51% for Obama. There are a few that may give us outliers, okay? And generally when we look at polls, we look and see, well, 48% to 46%, okay, if there are two polls there that are looking at this difference, and the margin of error, okay, is only is 3%, well, that's within the margin, okay? So it could be just a random sampling variability. Maybe they didn't contact Mrs. Elkins because she was out picking up her kids, and they contacted Mrs. Black instead, and Mrs. Black was a Romney voter, and Mrs. Elkins was an Obama voter, okay? There's sampling variability. Generally, though, these things are pretty close, okay? So sampling variability can matter between plus or minus a few points when you have 1,000 people in a poll. But if a candidate's up 10%, 12%, okay, and poll after poll after poll is showing these large margins, chances are it's not going to change unless something happens, okay, substantively happens. For example, Obama gets arrested on a grand larceny charge or something like that. Right? So we generally know these things. Another state too close to call at the moment was also too close to call in 2008. Virginia has Obama 48% and Romney 47%. And then the state that is not really in play because it's safely in the Romney camp, I'm sorry, this time around seems to be Missouri. Okay, despite the Senate race and the controversy caused by the Republican Senate candidate's remarks over abortion, okay, this doesn't seem to have helped Obama very much. In Missouri, Obama is down. He's expected to get 44% of the vote, and Romney 51%. But what we're seeing, though, is what we saw early in the campaign. If we looked at sort of Kenske's work, okay, and the authors of that book really sort of separate the campaigns into different periods, okay, you might almost think that the sort of, if we looked at this campaign, okay, you saw maybe the period after the first debate was sort of Obama's downfall, okay, and then nothing really changed, okay, it sort of leveled off in debates 2 or 3, but we're almost seeing a little bit perhaps of a bounce back for Obama now. A number of states, North Carolina was seen as leaning Republican, and that now has gone into the toss-up status. Romney is still up 2%, 49 to 47, but again, that's within this sampling error, okay? So it's seen as too close to call. Obama was very good in North Carolina. Abramson et al. Talked about this with their get out the votes efforts, particularly among African Americans, a large African American population in North Carolina. So the question, I think, may lean on bringing that state back into play, may involve efforts to get that vote out again. New Hampshire is a perennial swing state, although it has only 4 electoral votes. Okay, so and Obama's ahead 49 to 47. Iowa 48 to 46 Obama, and Colorado 48 to 47%. So the race is very close. It's very exciting. One random gaffe or one controversy can really pull it one way or another. But right now, I guess if I were advising the campaigns, I would be a lot more nervous if I was Romney, okay? Even though many states are within the margin of error, okay, what you're going to see is Obama does have enough of a lead where it would take a lot of random things to really push many of these into Romney's camp, okay? Turnout is still very important, though, and I think the point that was made by Abramson et al., the air versus the ground campaign, okay, in that chapter, the air war, which we'll look at in a second, is really what they do on TV, attacking one another, making one another look awful, and most of the ads are negative on the, if you notice, negative on the other candidate and not so much positive. We can get to that in a few minutes, but but the ground campaign really revolves around making sure you're getting people out to vote, okay? And the interesting thing now that's changed in the past decade of American sort of political life is early voting used to be for people like me and people in the military, right? You're just away or you're disabled. And now more states have really facilitated early, or what they call no-fault voting, okay? And it's often not just voting by mail, it's the idea that you can go to a local library and they'll have polling booths set up well before election day, okay? That's, I think, on the one hand. And for people that don't normally have the time to turn out, that could be very beneficial and some people think it's particularly beneficial to Democrats because Republicans generally turn out in slightly greater numbers, particularly now that many of the people who may have been initially mobilized, okay, to vote for Obama in 2008 are less enthused. So maybe they need to have voting facilitated for them. On the other side, a couple of states, including a couple of battleground states, have enacted more restrictive voter ID laws, which have been upheld by the Supreme Court. This is a source of potential controversy. Laws that, for example, force you to have some sort of identification on you. It used to be you just went up, and in many states it still is, you can basically, you verify your address and you sign, you give your signature, okay? Your address is in many states public information, so anyone can go up claiming. So on the one hand, you have largely Republican people saying that, well, this is a prime opportunity for voter fraud, and then you have people who are advocates for the poor, and many of these tend to fall into Democratic activist camps saying, well, a lot of poor people don't have a picture ID. If you don't have a driver's license in the United States, chances are you don't have a picture ID. You certainly don't have a passport if you don't have a driver's ID. So there's a bit of controversy going on. There was sort of a very, which could interest us in an international environment. I don't know if anyone had heard, but in Texas, the Attorney General is quite miffed in the state of Texas because much like any other election in democratic societies, American elections have long had international monitors. Okay, as a matter of fact, George Bush, after his sort of election in 2000, and after electoral irregularities were found in Florida, okay, he said, well, actually, we do want international monitors, and we welcome them. The Texas State Attorney General didn't necessarily like that, and he wrote to this group of international monitors, which is recognized as an international body. The United States is a signature to this treaty that allows or welcomes these electoral monitors, and said, you know, don't come within 100 feet of our polling stations or we'll have you arrested. So there was a bit of a controversy, okay? But like any other democratic nation, the United States has pretty much long welcomed electoral monitors, and it's seen as a source of just fairness to verify our elections. And of course, we and a number of friends of mine have actually served as electoral monitors. The United States sends electoral monitors to other nations. Particularly, it's of interest in states that have had problems, okay? So that's the latest controversy. But I think the elections are really too close to call. It's going to be a good election night. The thing that interested me also about the early voting is Obama voted yesterday. He became, I think, the first president to vote early. And I'm actually wondering why he did that, because reading Kenske's book reminded me that he's actually tried very hard to not be seen as part of the Chicago political machine. Okay, Chicago is not the world's most honest place in terms of electoral corruption, and Kenske et al. Referenced that in their sort of narrative of Obama, saying that, well, actually, you know, he tried to show himself as someone from Kansas, this Midwest, you know, this sort of prairie Midwestern state, and wanted to distance himself. But you know, it's sort of interesting, I think, in terms of, you know, why does he want to have himself photographed in Chicago, remind voters that, you know, he's from Chicago, he's, you know, part of that group. And I think part of it, though, was because the campaign was probably telling him, look, you've got to press turnout, right? Remind people. And by the act of perhaps the president voting, this was more important than sort of priming, to use Kenske's language, any sort of negative attributes about Chicago politics. Okay, so that's that. Ads, okay, political ads. One thing I think we have to differentiate before we really look at ads is the scope of ads have changed quite a bit in American political history. One is because they've just become much more professionalized, okay? But two is also because they, of the political environment showing ads. As I think I mentioned maybe the second week, you now have these things called 527s and PACs, okay? Political action committees came about after the regulation tightened a bit in the wake of the Watergate era in the 1970s, okay, about who could donate to candidates and who could put on the air. But the Supreme Court has generally ruled very unfavorably towards disallowing groups unaffiliated with the candidates to run any ads they want and spend as much money on ads that they want. So really, you have right now in American politics, or more specifically, I should say, the states where that are in play. You have the Obama campaign and you have the Romney campaign running, okay, a lot of ads, because total expenditures on this election are expected to top $2 billion. Okay, so it's going to be, not surprisingly, the most expensive campaign. But we say that pretty much every presidential election. So the next one will be, of course, the most expensive campaign too. But you also have these, I guess, shady groups on both sides that are running ads, okay? Now, they're not legally allowed to confer with the campaigns, okay? So one of the barriers that the Supreme Court has said is, okay, you're allowed speech, but laws prohibiting these groups, okay? And they often have sort of these, you know, Move On PAC, you know, the North Carolina Republicans for Democracy or something like that. They often take on these names. They appear and then they sort of disappear right after the election. There's nothing preventing really a revolving door. You know, one of the ads that the McCain group was running, they were all his former staffers that pitched in and sort of formed a group. Okay, so And generally, they're often nastier, okay, than the campaigns because I mean, one of the nice things of having this unaffiliated, okay, group running ads on your behalf is you could say, well, it's not me. We're not allowed to, you know, that disgusting ad that you just saw, you know, making my candidate out to be a crook or a thief or whatever. That's just not us. We had nothing to do with it. But they're probably shedding little tears that these ads are running. So they could basically disavow, this law allows campaigns to sort of disavow the worst that these groups are running. However, there are bad case scenarios in that they are unregulated. Okay, let's say you're running in a state that's kind of liberal and you're trying as a Republican to run in a general election. You can have one of these groups pop up and highlight your anti-abortion stances, right? So because it's uncoordinated means that, you know, the message that these groups are sending might not always be beneficial to the candidates. Okay, so it's sort of an interesting scenario. So I like when I go to look at these. Okay, if you look at campaigns. Okay, the living room candidate has archived campaigns, campaign commercials going back to 1952. And the interesting thing is to sort of see how they've changed, not just from sort of a more amateur to a professional outlook, but also from the message that they're trying to say, right? We went through last week the fact that, you know, there are really two types of issues in a campaign, right? There are positional issues, okay, which actually say here's where the candidate stands on the issue, okay? And then there are sort of the valence issues. I can do better than my candidate on something that we share, everybody shares. Everybody wants a good economy. Everybody wants us safe from terrorism, okay? You'll also see, if you were to look and do sort of a sample of all these ads, I think the number of ads highlighting the candidate and the number of ads attacking his opponent, okay? I mean, the easiest ad really in 1952, and one of the more famous first ads, okay, was the fact that, you know, of just introducing Eisenhower to the American public. And what's hilarious is that if you think about it, this ad is completely substantiveless.
I for president, I for president, I for president, I for president. You like ice, I like ice. Everybody likes ice for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take ice to Washington. We don't want John or Dean or Harry. Let's do that big dumb rice. Let's get in step with the guy that's left. Get in step with ice. You like ice, I like ice. Everybody likes ice for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take ice to Washington. We got to get where we are going. Travel day and night for president. Adelaide go the other way. We'll all go with ice. You like ice, I like ice. Everybody likes ice for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take ice to Washington. We'll take ice to Washington.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country. Vote for Eisenhower.
Well, if you look at the theme, number one, it's quite amateurish. The 52, I mean, TV was around in the United States in 48, but the 52 campaign was really where the ads took off. Some of the ads were so bad because they were literally copied from radio scripts, okay? So, and that didn't work. But the only thing you can gather out of this ad is that it's people coming into Washington. It's these common people, right? And that's a theme throughout sort of American political history in that you have the outsider, Eisenhower as this common man. You had basically people from all walks of life. But there was absolutely no issues discussed in that ad other than just repeating Eisenhower's name over and over and over again. So, so that's sort of the positive, sort of get the candidate's name out there. There was, now his opponent, Adlai Stevenson, ran, I think, which was one of the first negative ads, which you have to sort of know a little bit about American political history.
All right.
I'm so glad we're friends again, Bob.
Yes, we agree on everything.
Let's never separate again, Bob.
Never again,
Bob.
I,
Bob.
Will Ike and Bob really live happily ever after? Is the White House big enough for both of them? Stay tuned for a musical interlude.
Reuben, I've been thinking, Bob and Ike now think alike. With the general in the White House, who'd give the orders, Bob or Ike? Let's vote for Adley and John.
That refers to Bob Taft, who was sort of the right-wing conservative. And it's basically, Eisenhower, of course, ran as a moderate in this election, okay, largely to overcome. He couldn't really win the vote without sort of running to the center. He had to show that he was a different type of a Republican, okay. Bob Taft, was a conservative Republican who opposed the New Deal, okay. And remember, as we read, the New Deal coalition of voters was very strong at the time. Okay, so what the Stevenson campaign was trying to do was basically say that Eisenhower was not really a moderate Republican. Of course, that's been sort of lost to political history, but that's one of the early attack ads. Things pretty much go the same. I don't want to take too much time. But then 64 is sort of a watershed in negative ads. You had basically Lyndon Johnson running against Barry Goldwater, who was a very conservative Republican, and he ends up blowing him away in the actual race. But there was this famous ad called the Daisy Cutter, okay? And they wanted to try to basically portray Goldwater as extreme. It's not a good commentary on the American educational system and its teaching of count.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes.
That's Lyndon Johnson.
The world in which all of God's children can live are to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
The interesting thing is this ad was only run once, okay? But much like Kensky et al., what the Johnson campaign got was an amazing amount of free press out of this. People said it was horrifying. It was horrifying. But people also said, these same news commentators were saying, well, actually, let's think about this. Why is Johnson running? Oh, yeah, because Barry Goldwater was voting, against nuclear test ban treaties, and he was generally seen as a hawk on foreign policy in an era where the Cuban Missile Crisis was fresh in people's heads and so forth. The other thing that comes out of these ads that Johnson ran was the fact that he was so far up on Goldwater. It was very clear that Johnson was going to win very early in that race. The Democrats were really afraid. Democrats lower down the ticket, okay, were afraid that many Democrats were going to take this victory for granted and stay home. So they tried to sort of scare people into turning out by running this huge controversial ad. But that's probably seen as one of the most controversial ads in history. And it was, the interesting thing is everybody thinks it was run, again and again. It was only run once on TV, and it really had its trick. It really did the trick. Now, last week I said Nixon was quite good at scaring the hell out of people. And this comes in 1968 during the height of the Vietnam War protests, or as the Vietnam War protests were just getting done, just really taking full force. And he runs basically a law and order campaign, and sort of saying he's going to bring law and order and stop the chaos. But now they're in color, most of them. So it looks like a Humphrey ad. So it's this idea that, you know, you have this nice face, and then all of a sudden the chaos that was sort of engulfing America. And all of his ads are pretty much like that for '68.
It is time for an honest look at the problem of order in the United States. Dissent is a necessary ingredient of change. But in a system of government that provides for peaceful change, there is no cause that justifies resort to violence. Let us recognize that the first civil right of every American is to be free from domestic violence. So I pledge to you, we shall have order in the United States.
So vote like your whole world depended on it. Vote for Nixon. Okay. And the interesting thing is these people in this ad make sort of a comeback in '72 where he actually makes appeals to youth.
You asked for an end to the war. You wanted peace. You said the draft was unfair. Why should blacks and poor kids be more liable to the draft than the whites and well-off? You asked for a say in our government. You wanted a voice in your future. You said, why isn't something being done to save our environment? You wanted human priorities to come first. You spoke out for change. You asked for reform. You looked for a better America.
We cannot learn from one another until we stop shouting at one another, until we speak quietly enough so that our words can be heard, as well as our voices.
When Richard Nixon came into office, all America was asking for change, especially our youth. President Nixon wanted to turn things around. The war must end, you said. There were 550,000 American troops in Vietnam when President Nixon took office. Today, over 500,000 American soldiers have come home. Less than 40,000 remain, none engaged in ground combat.
Many presidents have ended wars. Very few presidents have had success in building the structure of peace that would last. We've had a war in every generation in this century. I want the rest of this century, and then beyond that, to possibly be a time when no Americans are fighting any place in the world.
Change the draft laws and make them fair, you said. In the 1960s, the draft was a 7-year worry, based on an unfair selective service system. President Nixon changed that. He introduced the lottery, fair to all, and cut eligibility to 1 year. And now his plan calls for ending the draft completely in 1973. You wanted a voice in the future of our country. And in 1971, President Nixon saw the 26th Amendment become law, giving 18-year-olds the right to vote.
We are certifying the 26th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. That amendment, as you know, provides for the right to vote of all of our young people between 18 and 21. 11 million new voters.
So I think you get the point. But it's the fact of the matter is, Nixon was so far up in the lead that he was running actually positive ads and wasn't really mentioning his opponent. When the ads get more and more positive in the United States, generally it's a race that's a blowout. I mean, if you contrast that with McGovern, who's basically having to defend his issues. Incidentally, he just died last week.
They're paying people on welfare today for doing nothing. They're laughing at our society. Because we're all hard-working people and we're getting laughed at for working every day. Why not have them go to work and clean up the dirty streets in our town?
Well, I agree. Richard Nixon goes around talking as though I'm some kind of a radical because I believe in guaranteed jobs for people that he's throwing out of work. He said he was going to cut the welfare rolls. He put 4 million people on welfare. That's not my idea of delivering on a campaign pledge. Now, I'm telling you, and I mean it, we're going to do whatever is necessary to provide a job for every able-bodied man and woman in this country who wants to work, and those who don't want to work shouldn't be paid anything in the way of public support.
McGovern, Democrat, for the people.
So it's this idea, he's having basically to justify the fact that he's not a radical. That's generally not a campaign that is not going well. If you skip to 84, I mean, Reagan's second election was much more slogan-based and positive too, because he was ahead by quite a bit. Okay, and his theme was Morning in America. Okay, and you see the sort of, well, I don't really have to.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
What you don't hear, of course, the big difference of how campaigns are often portrayed and how they actually unfold is you don't hear candidates taking distinctive positions, okay, on controversial issues of the day, right? Why wouldn't they do that? Well, that just alienates a segment of your electorate. So you wouldn't exactly want to stake out your position on a controversial issue such as civil rights or, let's say abortion or gay marriage, right? You don't see Obama going on TV right now and staking out positions. There were many, many ads mentioned in the Kensky et al. Book as effectual, and how that sort of framed the debate as both Obama and McCain attempted to sort of portray themselves and portray one another. One of the funniest things is you have this young upstart guy, and I wanted to show you the celebrity ad that McCain ran. Is basically this idea of the president as a prima donna, as someone who's more of like a rock star but of little substance. And this was seen as one of the more effectual ads, even though it didn't really go anywhere.
He's the biggest celebrity in the world. But is he ready to lead? With gas prices soaring, Barack Obama says no to offshore drilling and says he'll raise taxes on electricity. Higher taxes, more foreign oil. That's the real Obama.
I'm John McCain, and I approve this message.
Okay, and that's Britney Spears, or maybe whoever they hired to look like Britney Spears. You'll see at the end the sort of the cheesy "I'm John McCain and I approved of this ad," or "I'm Barack Obama and I approved of this ad." This was due to a law passed, I think in the early 2000s, called "Stand by Your Ad." So every sort of ad run by the candidates or even a PAC has to have something like that. So it was seen as a way of perhaps reducing the sort of negativity of the ads. It didn't seem to work all that much. So you basically, Kensky et al. Really look at two themes that emerge. One is that Obama's inexperienced. Okay, that was one of the key themes that they tried to focus on, but also that McCain, they were trying to subliminally play the idea that McCain was so old and so forth in terms of his credentials. I have it on another page, excuse me. While I'm loading this, does anybody have any questions, comments, protests? So I made a list, and I put it on our Moodle site of campaigns that really highlight this theme. Okay, so we've got the celebrity one. We've got the Obama as Moses. That's a little long, so I won't show it. That uses sort of this idea of Obama sort of being full of himself, basically, being seen as a rock star and so forth. But the McCain sort of too old. You see very little positive ads by either side.
1982, John McCain goes to Washington. Things have changed in the last 26 years, but McCain hasn't. He admits he still doesn't know how to use a computer, can't send an email, still doesn't understand the economy, and favors $200 billion in new tax cuts for corporations, but almost nothing for the middle class. After one president who was out of touch, we just can't afford more of the same.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Okay, so you see at the end, he starts talking policy, but at the beginning, it's trying to prime, look, this guy has just been around for a while, okay, and really plays on the idea of him not being able to sort of be in touch with the modern times and so forth, and Kensky et al. Really pick up on that, okay. The other thing, of course, is just basically generally being out of touch, which was mentioned, and here's the houses ad.
And I approve this message.
Maybe you're struggling just to pay the mortgage on your home. But recently, John McCain said the fundamentals of our economy are strong. Then again, that same day, when asked how many houses he owns, McCain lost track. He couldn't remember. Well, it's 7. 7 houses. And here's one house America can't afford to let John McCain move into.
So there's all sorts of ads. Now, those are the official ads, okay? Those are kind of clean and nice. The Reverend Wright ads that were run were not really run by the McCain camp, but mentioned by Kensky.
For 20 years, Barack Obama followed a preacher of hate and said nothing is right raged against our country.
Not God bless America, God damn America, U.S. of KKKA.
He built his power base in Wright's church. Wright was his mentor, advisor, and close friend. For 20 years, Obama never complained until he ran for president. Barack Obama, too radical, too risky. The National Republican Trust PAC is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
And the National Republican Trust is totally unaffiliated with the Republican Party. So you can basically have any name you want. Not to be outdone, not to think that all these are crazy right-wingers. You have the Brave New PAC, which is an Obama.
70 years old, and I lived through being a prisoner of war. I'm going to tell it like it is. I think I can say with authority that the prisoner of war experience is not a good prerequisite for a president of the United States. He was well known as a very volatile guy, and he would blow up and go off like a Roman candle. John McCain is not somebody that I would like to see with his finger near the red button.
Brave New PAC is responsible for the content of this message.
Okay, so basically he was in a prisoner of war camp and therefore he's crazy. That was the sort of the message that was sent, okay? And campaigns would get in a lot of trouble, okay, and would face probably a negative backlash if they ran things like this. Like, come on, this is a McCain was seen as a huge military hero, at least when he ran in 2000, and even by a large percentage of the American electorate in 2008. Obama did not want to come out against his military record with something like this. But a lot of this came from the whispers of the Bush campaign when McCain ran against him in a primary in 2000. This idea that, he's volatile, he has some sort of lingering issues from his time in captivity and so forth. And there's a question as to whether or not he's fit for service, particularly his age and so forth. But Brave New Pack was not really a friendly pack. They played pretty nasty. So this makes fun of his cancer.
The relevance of knowing the details of his course with melanoma are very important. Another bout of cancer for John McCain while he's President of the United States would profoundly impact his capacity to lead.
Melanoma is the deadliest of skin cancers, and the chances of survival if you have melanoma spread through your body are very, very slim.
Brave New Pack and Democracy for America responsible for the content of this advertising.
So not exactly the most positive group. Basically, that was also run in I believe, late September, okay, when Palin, so they're trying to prime, this idea that Palin was not ready, which came through in the data cited by Kensky et al. And so forth. One of the questions from the audience was basically, are candidates limited in terms of the amount of advertising that they can run? And what limits them is money. Up until recently, presidential campaigns had the option of taking matching funds that were funded by a tax deduction, okay, or a tax. Americans could pledge their taxes going into this fund. In exchange for receiving money for this fund, matching money, so a dollar for a dollar or a pound for a pound, candidates had to agree to abide by spending limits, okay? Obama promised originally in his campaign to abide by these limits and accept public money. It became very clear that he was going to be able to raise a lot more money, and it would have hurt him a lot. So he took a little bit of abuse for going back on his word and saying that, and he basically forewent the public money and busted all spending caps. Okay, so for a while it was contained, or presidential election spending was contained. But recently, I don't think either candidates really care or really ever seriously considered spending caps in this election, because it's just too lucrative. There's too much money out there. I should add that caps, when they're imposed in elections, it's generally per election. Okay, so when there's a primary election, okay, you can spend, and then primary election seasons end at the end of the convention when the candidate's formally nominated, and then another cycle, okay? So for individuals, there may be caps on how much individuals are allowed to donate to each candidate, okay? But it's not per year, okay? What happens is that I'm allowed to, let's say, donate to Barack Obama until the convention, and then I'm allowed to donate to Barack Obama after the convention. So there's a primary and a general election. And this is why, at least it was often seen that candidates running, or who didn't have to run in primaries, okay, would be advantaged, because they could basically build up this huge war chest of money that they didn't really have to spend defending themselves in primary elections, okay, and then they could, so then it was basically, and then it was basically available to them in the general election. Campaign spending in the United States has never worked very well, okay. As I alluded to before, a lot of the campaign laws go back to at least the early 20th century, if not longer. But generally, whenever a campaign law is made, creative people find ways to work around it. And that's largely, well, not largely, but partially at least, because of the First Amendment. Okay, it's very hard for courts just to say, well, political speech is illegal, okay, but only during election campaigns, right? That's the cornerstone of, American one of the key pillars of American representative democracy is the right to speak, the right to protest. So how do you basically limit, okay, information. So it generally doesn't work. Okay, limits on individual spending have been upheld, but it's a very uneasy relationship that the courts have in trying to limit campaign spending. Okay, in the late 70s, a court case basically said that money equals speech. Okay, and threw down, the Supreme Court said that money equals speech, and threw down a lot of restrictions, particularly candidates who spend their own money. Okay, so it's not a very good system. The other debate, of course, is that in a representative democracy, being more philosophical about it, okay, everybody seems to think that money in campaigns is a bad thing. It's dirty, okay? But what money does allow, of course, is candidates to get their message out and the American voters to realize that there's a campaign going on and that they should pay attention. Okay, so now the quality of information, I think, as we've seen, okay, is not always the greatest, okay? But the idea is, imagine a campaign with a very limited amount of adverts, okay? Would turnout drop, okay? Would people sort of forget to sort of think that there's a campaign going on and to vote, okay? It's not surprising when there's not a very big media interest going on in the campaign, so the off-year elections, turnout drops by 25% in the United States. Now, is that just because people like to vote for president and would vote anyway without the money being spent, okay? Or is that there a really good argument for more money being spent in campaigns because it informs more voters? It allows, I mean, not all of this. I mean, the air war is mostly negative. I'll give you that, okay? But the ground war, okay, is mostly involving getting people out to the polls, okay? So some of that money that's being pumped into these campaigns, okay, are also spent on very, very important things that many would say is very important for democracy. Strengthening political parties, keeping the party organization strong. Okay, so I think it's a debate worth having, okay, but I think the debate in the United States is that it's never really worked very well. Campaign finance regulation has never worked very well. And when I teach more in-depth courses on, let's say, congressional campaigns and so forth, it's the worst lecture to write because it's not one you can kind of wing, because every election there's another court case that throws out the previous law, okay, that brings in new restrictions. Oh, we'll get it this time. No, you really won't. What will happen is they'll bring in restrictions. There'll be these things that work their way around the limitations on campaign spending. Claim free speech. They go to court. The law gets thrown out because it's a restriction on their speech, and we're starting over again. There are people, okay, my colleague who was here last year, Mike Munger from Duke University, actually argues that, well, the reality is we're never going to get this right. The only thing that really will solve this problem is a law that says something simple. Unlimited donations, but full disclosure, right? You can't secretly give money to a candidate, but you have to basically say, but you can give as much money as you want, okay? Restrictions in Britain are kind of interesting, right? Because of if I understand correctly, I'm not an expert in British campaign finance, but you pretty much, parties can receive a lot of money from private donors, correct? Right? Lots of money, like unlimited amounts? Yeah, in the United States, parties are still restricted per donor, okay? There was a whole phase where we went through, well, some of this is really for party building activities, i.e. get out the vote, and that was exempted. But it's a really, really difficult thing, and the courts have not done very well with it. Public financing of elections have been also, not just presidential elections, but also of congressional elections, have been proposed for years. And the problem with public financing is it's really good to say, well, let's just get all this money out of politics. And Tom, we agree with you that, you know, a lot of money tells voters that there's an election going on. So we want candidates to have lots of money. Let's, even if we fund it out of the tax purse, a House race, a competitive House race at most maybe goes for 20 million. Okay, that's not a lot of money. So let's just fund it out at 20 million per competitive House race. If you look at the $1 trillion plus U.S. federal budget, that's a drop in the bucket. We like clean democracy. But if you give an incumbent and a challenger the same amount of money, the data show, okay, that basically that's an Incumbent Protection Act. Okay, incumbents rarely lose. Well, they rarely lose, period, in the U.S. House, and a little bit more so in Senate elections, but they rarely lose unless they're outspent. And it's a signal that there's a lot of enthusiasm and that there's a need, okay, for a challenger might come from people giving that challenger a lot of money, okay. Michelle Bachmann, remember her? She's in a lot of trouble right now. Her race is not going so well in Minnesota, and she may be one of the few Republican incumbents, House members, to lose. The Democrats are pouring a lot of money in because basically what has happened is the voters have signaled that this is a competitive race, and then they threw more and more money in, okay, and that's quite an expensive race. Interestingly enough, Paul Ryan is also having to run for re-election in Wisconsin and is evidently having trouble. He's the Republican vice presidential candidate, so he could be, he could actually lose not once, but twice, okay? And yes, you're allowed to be on the ticket twice. That would be a state law in the United States. That's the other problem with campaign finance regulations, because federal elections really lie at the intersection of American democracy in that most election regulation, there's no electoral commission like you'd have in the United States, United Kingdom really. Most of the regulation, okay, aside from civil rights stuff, aside from some campaign finance stuff, is done by the states. Okay, so you have, when I go and get an absentee ballot, remember it's the West Virginia, okay, Board of Elections that sets the rules, not the United States government. The United States government sort of has restrictions that kind of protects my right to vote, but leaves it up to the states to administer. Okay, so you get some things. Now, what's running, okay, in 2012, okay, we get the foreign policy, okay, tour. This is Romney's ad.
The president began with an apology tour of going to various nations and criticizing America. I think they looked at that and saw weakness. That's the reason I call it an apology tour. You went to the Middle East and you flew to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey and Iraq, and you skipped Israel, our closest friend in the region. You said that America had dictated to other nations. Mr. President, America has not dictated to other nations. We have freed other nations from dictators.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
Okay, so the America Apology Tour, that's played quite well. Obama, okay, has hit back.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
He keeps saying it.
This president cannot tell us that you're better off today than when he took office.
Well, here's where we were in 2008.
Worst financial collapse since the Great Depression.
American workers were laid off in numbers not seen in over 3 decades.
And here's where we are today. 30 months of private sector job growth, creating 4.6 million new jobs. We're not there yet, but the real question is, whose plan is better for you? The president's plan asks millionaires to pay a little more, to help invest in a strong middle class, clean energy, and cut the deficit. Mitt Romney's plan? A new $250,000 tax break for multimillionaires, roll back regulations on the banks that cratered the economy, and raise taxes on the middle class.
They want to go back to the same old policies
Bill.
in the first place. We're not going back. We are moving forward.
Forward.
Okay. So an interesting use, I think, of Bill Clinton there. Which he has some of the highest approval ratings. He's an amazing political character, given his personal approval ratings are quite low, but his political approval ratings are very high, and they're starting to really hit. You may have heard the China connection.
This is America's manufacturing when President Obama took office. This is China's. Under Obama, we've lost over 500,000 manufacturing jobs. And for the first time, China is beating us. 7 times Obama could have stopped China's cheating. 7 times he refused.
It's time to stand up to the cheaters and make sure we protect jobs for the American people.
Barack Obama, failing to stop cheating, failing American workers. I met Romney and I approved this message.
Okay, so China is bad, bunch of cheaters. So we learned that, but that plays very well in sort of think of where these ads are running, right? They're running in Ohio, what's called the Rust Belt states, where manufacturing jobs have been hit very hard. Okay, so it's not, you know, I think the issue is a little bit more complex, but you can't explain that in a 30-second ad. Okay. And then they've really hit Romney on his gubernatorial record.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
It started like this.
I speak the language of business. I know how jobs are created.
But it ended like this. One of the worst economic records in the country. When Mitt Romney was governor, Massachusetts lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs, a rate twice the national average, and fell to 47th in job creation, 4th from the bottom. Instead of hiring workers from his own state, Romney outsourced call center jobs to India.
Oh, okay, now India is the enemy.
Taxes for millionaires like himself, while raising them on the middle class, and left the state $2.6 billion deeper in debt. So now, when Mitt Romney talks about what he'd do as president,
I know what it takes to create jobs.
remember, we've heard it all before.
I know how jobs are created.
Romney economics. It didn't work then, and it won't work now.
Okay, and then of course, not to be outdone, we have our independent nasty ads.
Mitt Romney. He made millions off companies that went bankrupt, while workers lost promised health and retirement benefits. His own tax return from last year reveals he made $21 million, yet paid a lower tax rate than many middle-class families. Now Romney's proposing a huge new $150,000 tax cut for the wealthiest 1%, while cutting Medicare and education for us. Mitt Romney. If he wins, we lose. Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So probably he wouldn't want, the Obama campaign doesn't necessarily want to stroke the 1% thing as much, because then he's going to be accused of sort of being socialist or being in favor of redistribution, which was as Kensky pointed out, which was sort of his Achilles heel, being seen as too liberal. But the PACs are doing a good job at that. Okay, and of course.
Another month. Even more Americans jobless. If you had President Obama's record, what would you do? Would you joke?
Shovel-ready was not as shovel-ready as we expected.
Deny reality?
We tried our plan and it worked.
Even insist?
The private sector is doing fine.
Or do what Obama's allies are doing now, launch shameful, dishonest attacks. With no record to run on, it's the only strategy Obama has left. Restore Future is responsible for the content of this message.
So that's sort of the idea of the ads, okay, that are running this year. I think this year's ads are heavily focused much more on the economy, and the candidates are really focusing on one another's efforts. The foreign policy ads, rather than being about wars and conflict, are more about outsourcing jobs to other countries. Ads you also don't really see because Romney was governor. Okay, the other tactic often used by campaigns, and it was used against Obama a little bit in 2008, is to point to their voting record. Okay, it's actually easier, I think, in the United States to run for president as an executive rather than a former legislature, whether you served in the state or the national Senate or House. Okay, it's because what will happen is these ads, these 30-second ads, will take little votes that you may have done. They may have had absolutely nothing to do with your overall ideology, because there's thousands and thousands of votes in a legislative season, and really highlight them. So you'll see that, you know, you'll get these ads. Barack Obama supported, studying, cows' lactation policies. What a waste of money. Or the bridge to nowhere. Remember, I don't know, some of you may have, there was a federal building project in Alaska that basically was a bridge that was really just what we would call a pork barrel project. Federal spending that was spread out to Alaska for public works projects. Okay, those are what often make hay and negative ads. Romney never really served in the legislature. He just served as governor. So that's almost, I think, a benefit these days. Okay, you probably don't want, it's very hard to serve in a legislature because your voting record gets really picked apart by these things. Anything more before we do a little bit more on Kensky? Are there any questions? Okay. So I guess the question here now is, do campaigns really matter? I mean, I guess that's what, and Aldrich et al., in the end, they come using cross-sectional data, basically do come to, I guess, at least a lukewarm conclusion that the campaigns did matter. Okay. Playing devil's advocates, you get to their ideas that, well, why did the campaigns matter? Largely, some of it because of voting behavior, because of turnout, okay, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks, a more in-depth study, that the idea is that there was mobilization effects. And they also sort of looked at a few of the ebbs and flows concerning the conventions, okay, and foreign policy and so forth. But, I mean, what we in social science would call a counterfactual, okay, well, what would have happened, okay, had the economy not tanked in the beginning, in the middle of the campaign, really tanked, became evident, right, Lehman Brothers breaking down, but it happened earlier. Would you have seen a more stable campaign than you did in 2008? Okay, so the problem, I think, for saying that the campaign mattered or it didn't matter in 2008 was you had a huge economic issue that was very heavily intertwined, okay, with the events that were going on the ground. Undoubtedly, McCain made a mistake in sort of trying to call off this awkward move in 2008 of trying to call off the debate, running back to Washington, and then the Republicans pretty much deserted him, which was really quite a devastating move for the campaign because it showed not so much that the bill that they were trying to pass to keep the economy from collapsing completely was good or bad, it was that he couldn't lead, okay? The idea that he ran back to Washington, he tried to look statesmanlike, like he was getting people together, and then all of a sudden, nobody wanted anything to do with his bill. Okay, we're all out of town, John. Sorry about that. And that was the reception that he got. But the question, I guess, is what if the economy had collapsed a little bit earlier? Would it have been a more stable campaign? Kensky's book is good in that it really has, I guess, a lot of graphs, but it exploits a data set where for the first time we really can look very in depth about the days, okay, of a campaign. Okay, day by day you're seeing the analysis. You're probably tired of it after reading it, okay? And one of the things comes through that there's volatility, okay, that there's a lot of volatility through these series. What also comes through is if we were to go back to the American voter and look at it, is we'd see the perceptual screen, right? Many of the charts make very clear that independents see things differently than Republicans and see things as Democrats, right? You knew, okay, probably by the 15th graph that was banged into your head, okay, that if they were looking about a good thing about John McCain, right, the people who self-identified as Republicans in that survey were going to be higher on the like-dislike scale than the people who identified as independents and then those who identified as Republicans. Empirically, though, you can do a lot more with that data. Okay, what I didn't like about the chapter, and they were doing it sort of, I mean, what's nice is it would have been a lot more difficult to read if they had done this. But really what you want to do in looking, okay, at voting data, right? Let's say you have, I don't know, a day-by-day measure of McCain being trustworthy, right? And if we went back to GV200, And a simple, let's say this, it was a simple survey question that asked, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how trustworthy would you consider John McCain? And in the Kensky et al. Sort of world, right, you would have gotten what we would call a time series, right? On the x-axis, you have the dates, okay? And then on the y-axis, you have trust, okay? And you get a measure. Something that may have looked like that, okay? And let's say it's the entire electorate. Let's not complicate things, okay? Well, what causes, what's very rarely, okay, analyzed by these authors is the cause, right? It's inferred, right? The causes that they're referring to are often inferred. They're not shown or they're not tested in an empirical way, okay? Because, to build on GV200 a little bit, okay, really what you have is McCain trustworthy at time t. So you're taking that, and you're saying really what happens in time series is you have McCain is a function of McCain trustworthy at time t minus 1, okay? So really you want to say, well, his function, his trustworthiness, or any sort of attribute he may have, is really a function of his trustworthiness the last day, okay? Much like if we were looking at presidential approval, or how Barack Obama is doing in Ohio, okay, he's not going to generally go from, you know, 65 to 42. There's no real randomness, right? Okay, it's a lot of times approval or a candidate's characteristic is a function of his previous characteristic, okay? And it's quite stable, okay? So if you were to put, let's say, a slope on this, okay, much like you would in sort of a multiple regression, right? We would expect this to be very high, okay? But what we were really doing, and what they should have been inferring throughout the chapter, is, let's say, McCain's trustworthiness goes down. Maybe there's a slew of ads released about the Keating 5, which was discussed, right? So what they're really trying to go for, I think, in this book, is to make the argument a little bit that the media works, okay? That the media has both a direct and indirect relationship, okay? Well, media being the first is, you know, an event happens, okay? Or a campaign commercial is ad. And second, okay, that the media covers it, okay? But you don't really get any sort of you don't really get any sort of testing of these arguments, okay? The way you could with such a rich data set. Now, it may have been written for an audience that they thought it would be dangerous to do this, but really what you want is, okay, you want sort of, is there a shock? Okay, so let's say a Keating commercial. Okay. And that's a T. And is there also, let's say, a trend? Okay. So one of the things we might be looking for, okay, if we were really trying to show a relationship between some sort of media burst or media output, okay, is a shock. Let's say something comes to light. This might have a negative slope. Okay, and maybe there might even be ramifications, okay, that it continues on, okay, that once the public hears about it, okay, it might get disseminated, okay, it might keep going and grow and grow and grow, okay, and this thing might continue to have an effect long after the initial ad, or it could have what's sometimes called is a pulse, right? It has an immediate negative impact, and then that pulse goes down, okay, or pulse decay, it's sometimes called. Okay? And that's much like what you would do if you were studying, let's say, stocks. Okay, if you were working in the city and you were seeing sort of, well, you know, stock prices, let's say, okay, are really a function of, you know, I don't know, stock, IBM, let's say. It's a famous one in the States. It's always referred to. Is IBM stock at time t is a function of IBM stock at time t minus 1, but we may look for things, okay, look for significant events, such as, let's say, the launch of the new iPad, okay. Does IBM stock go down, okay, when Apple releases a new product? That's very 1980s. They're not as direct competitors as they used to be when I was a kid. But, and then how long does it persist for? What's the memory of this event? Okay? That's what's not really done in this book, and I think what can be done. Okay? Why is it not done? Well, if you were to do it, the challenge of this, let's say versus a GV200, okay, regression that you may have learned last year, is time series. What you have to do, okay, is what you may have learned is at the end of this regression thing, there's this nice thing called an error, okay, and one of the assumptions of a of regression, okay, is that the error is normally distributed, it's not correlated. Oh, I never thought I'd have to go through this again. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. And all sorts of other nice, happy things that Rob probably taught you, okay? Well, most of statistics, or most of the quantitative study of stats, deals with, well, what happens when these happy things don't behave well? Well, anytime you have a time series, these things are generally not happy, okay? The error term in a time series is generally not very happy. You have to actually get the data to smooth, or make it what's called make the data stationary. Get the trend out, okay? Because really, time series that of the type that were seen in the Kensky book, okay, are seen really, okay? There's a trend that could be random, that could be substantive, okay, or it could be related to specific events. Okay, really what we're after and what they're inferring through most of that is that the time series, is that the trends that we often see, okay, are related to specific events. Okay. Where we don't really go, okay, with this is, are these events having a significant or an insignificant effect, right? It's what do you call it? You're eyeballing it, okay? They're relying on the reader to eyeball it, which is quite imprecise for studying sort of political phenomena. What I want to know, I mean, if you were working, let's say, in the city, okay, and your boss says, well, you know, do we have to panic every time, you know, Apple releases its new gadget because, you know, our stock may be negatively affected? Well, you sort of say, well, look, the curve looks like this. That's what the book was, right? It was basically, well, the curve sort of looks like this looks like this. Okay, sometimes it's enormous, right? Sometimes it's so obvious that it almost has to be an effect. Okay. But when they're starting to get at me, well, the trend is down, this or that, and they're starting to infer stuff, I'm getting a bit skeptical, okay, in terms of the reading and how that reads in terms of stuff, okay? And then they're almost implying causality a lot, okay? They're implying things that sound very logical, or that should sound perhaps a bit logical to you, okay? You know, and one of them, okay, is if we were to look on page 201, okay, they come up with a causal model that sounds really good of how voters make decisions. I'll draw it out for you. Okay, so they're saying, well, your belief, and this is almost, let's say, a causal model, country on the wrong track. Okay, TVs and newspapers. Feed into your perception that the economy is the most important problem. Okay, that gets you angry at Republicans. okay? That makes you think McCain equals Bush. We'll call it McSame, okay? That makes you believe Obama can better handle the economy. And that gives you an Obama vote, okay? Plausible? Yeah, perhaps. But what are all these sort of heroic sort of things that you'd have to believe, I guess, to believe that this is the one way of the world, okay? So you're generally asked on a survey, is the country on the wrong track? I say yes, okay? Does that make me believe that the economy is the most important issue, or vice versa? So all of a sudden I'm saying, well, I'm not so sure about that. That could go the other way, okay? The economy's good. I can fill up my gas tank cheaply, or petrol, as we'd say here, cheaply, okay? And, you know, I'm happy, and I believe the country is on the right track, okay? TV and newspapers is interesting, right? Does it really take reading the papers in 2008 to believe that the economy was going poorly or that the economy was going badly? No. You must have lived under a rock if you didn't hear what was happening, okay? My friends were talking about it. We were all going to get laid off. Everything was going bad, right? So the idea, I mean, and one of the big arguments of this book is that, you know, newspaper readership matters and so forth. But does it matter in the way that they say it matters? Okay? I believe that media consumption matters, okay, that it primes, okay, the idea, okay? If you read probably the Daily Mail, you believe immigration is a huge problem in this country. Okay, there's no doubt that that's belief, but not quite sure the causality, right? I mean, sometimes I like reading the Daily Mail because I really get a good sort of feeling of, ooh, what is the Daily Mail going to say today about immigrants? It's not really because, so maybe eventually my sort of laughing at the matter will lead me to sort of a certain type of a newspaper readership, right? There's a lot going on here, okay? So how do you test for that, okay? I don't believe that there's anything there that's really convincing about concerning this argument, okay? What I would really sort of see is, well, what type of newspapers you read is important, okay? But the idea, who you blame for the economy might be part of the relationship, right? I mean, it's hard to say that the economy being the most important issue is a function of newspaper readership, okay? Or it could be completely spurious, that smarter people that are generally more attentive, okay, are also those who are newspaper readership. So really, the direction of this relationship is not there. It's that they're just smart people, right? Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that the economy, ooh, I don't know, maybe it's the economy. Okay, surge went well. Okay, it was the Iraq War, as I said, or the conflicts or terrorism when I started studying the 2007-2008 election. But that actually went pretty well. That problem went away. I'm a smart guy. I understand, well, that was a problem, but that's going away. So I'm a smart guy, and I'm saying, well, let's look at it. Let's search across the universe of possible issues. What might be the case? Oh, gee, seems like everybody's losing their job or fearful of losing their job. I guess maybe the economy is the most important issue, okay? And I read this in the newspaper, but there's no relation, there may not be a relationship there, okay? The economy is the most important issue, okay? And that leads you to think the Republicans are bad. Okay, fair enough. I believe that, okay? But is the relationship more or less complex? Maybe there's a direct relationship here, okay, but maybe there's also an indirect relationship, because in order to believe that the Republicans are bad because of the economy, you may actually have to believe that government, as I said last week, has anything to do with the economy. Okay? That's a much more indirect relationship. So it's almost like, okay, they're giving me a lot of data here. That's cool. They created this survey. I really like that. I like surveys. Okay, but they didn't really push it. Okay, they didn't really interrogate their data, which is quite rich, in the way that they should have. If I was in Greece, right, does anybody in Greece really believe their government has control of the economy? No, it's the Germans. No, I'm just kidding. Right? So this is a totally, a total interest. And if, let's say, the economy keeps going in the doldrums for another 20 years, will Americans sort of say, well, actually, it doesn't really matter who's the president? There are a lot of economists now that will say, the reality is every president, the next president, still has a lot of deficit worries to do. He's still not going to be able to spend as much money as he wants. That's going to annoy voters. Okay? They're all making promises now that they can't keep. And this is just a cycle of politics. And there's very little policy that will really do things. Okay? Republicans bad. Okay, you get McCain. That's probably right. Okay, but there's a whole host of other things. Maybe you did see McCain and Bush as different, but you just didn't like it. You just didn't like either of them. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. Okay, Obama better handling the economy. Well, I don't know how that follows. It's just sort of a perceptual screen, yes. Okay. And then ultimately the vote. It's a bit of a simplistic way. What's interesting here also is they have no sort of, they spend half the book, they spend pretty much every other figure, arguing that there's a partisan difference, a difference among Republicans and a difference among Democrats in how they see the world. And then where is this? Where is this? We've gone 200 pages or so, okay, for those of you who were able to stay awake through the whole thing, okay? And then all of a sudden, well, we get this causal model that's completely untested. Okay. Some of this would actually be very difficult to test, even with the rich data set that they have, okay? It could be that this model works for one form of newspaper readership. Could be that this model works for Democrats. Okay? The world is a lot more complex, okay, than is often made out. So you had a book, I think, with where you were basically snowballed with a lot of charts, a lot of figures, a lot of data. But that doesn't basically make them right. Okay? It doesn't make them, if somebody just throws a lot of data up at you, whether it's political data or market research data, and shows you fancy charts and graphs, right? There's enough there that you should question. Okay? The relationship between the media effects and all of the stuff that's going on, I'm not really that confident in. Okay? The data that they should have used, in my humble opinion, okay, is that one of the things you want to look at is there's a lot of what's called natural experiments in here. Because the campaign is so close, okay, and because of the Electoral College, as we said at the beginning of the lecture, is the way it is, where many advertisements are only running in a few small states, okay, you can see, well, the economy, the most important issue. Are different types of ads priming people, okay, to see the economy as being the most important issue? What type of different newspapers? Okay? Does newspaper readership matter? Okay, right? Or is it at least associated with? Okay, if I read The Independent yesterday, I might think that the government's reforms to the universities was nonsense. Okay? It was interesting. If you looked at all of the newspaper headlines, I was just in a hotel where there was a lot of newspapers picking someone up, so I did have a glance at all these papers, and the reforms were garbage, according to The Independent, right? None of the other papers covered it. So it was one of these questions of saying, well, your perceptions may come from different newspapers, different TV ads, and different stuff. And they have so much money and so much opportunity, they can actually probably link the voters, okay, to what environments they were in. Okay, so if certain things are running in your states, okay, then you can really look at it and interrogate. So if all of a sudden, let's say, the good experiments that can come from a data set this rich is, let's say, Obama in North Carolina, he wasn't really in North Carolina until it looked really close, until a couple of people did polls for him and said, look, we can actually win North Carolina. That wasn't expected in 2008. Okay, let's say he makes that decision on September 15th, boom, ads start running, okay? With a data set like this, then you can really start seeing, well, given the fact that there's more money involved, given the fact that I watch NBC, where the Obama campaign did a huge media buy, okay, on September 18th or September 19th, how did my perceptions of the world change? Okay, the good thing now is for the data that I have, okay, and I think it's on this. I now have data that not only interview individuals, but they also have characteristics of the people. So you'll see variables that say Saturday, NBC, which is an American television network in case you didn't know, 5 p.m., and it'll be a dummy variable, 0 or 1. Okay, they know actually, well, what time do you normally watch the news? Which news do you normally watch? Okay, at Vanderbilt University, you can actually tie ads. So there are databases now that if you're doing this sort of work, you can say, well, if I was a voter that was watching TV, I would have been exposed to this ad if I watched this station at this time. Okay, so we're getting more and more sophisticated in the United States about trying to capture this media exposure, but I didn't really see enough of it. Okay? It seems like the book was kind of rushed, right? They got a lot of money to collect a lot of data, okay, to do a lot of stuff, but this data set can be exploited a lot more than I think it was. And some of the claims that they were making were a bit heroic, given that they were really just looking at trends in the data. Okay, never be fooled, okay, by trends in the data. Okay, that's not a causal effect. So that's sort of the way I was looking. And that's really, I think, what I wanted to show. Are there any questions